welcome to this explainer. We're staring down the barrel of a fast-approaching financial reality that is going to impact almost every single American. We're talking about the impending 2032 Social Security crisis. We're going to unpack exactly what's happening to the funds, why the math is suddenly flashing red, and the two totally different political solutions floating around Washington right now to fix it. We've got some fascinating data to cover, so let's just jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the 2032 insolvency deadline. Second, the causes of the shortfall. Third, the Republican plan. Fourth, the Democratic plan. And finally, the ticking clock. Section 1, the 2032 insolvency deadline. The looming cliff. See that number right there? That is the harsh reality we are facing, 22 to 25%. If Congress doesn't intervene, the latest projections show the Social Security Fund for seniors goes insolvent by the end of 2032. And at that point, beneficiaries are looking at a sudden, devastating 22 to 25% cut to their benefits. For your average senior relying on these funds, we're talking about losing roughly $500 every single month. That is a massive hit. I mean, think about it. That's a whole monthly grocery budget. It's the electric bill during a summer heat wave, or the copay for essential heart medication. Now, when we say insolvent, it doesn't mean the program literally disappears overnight. Once the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund reserves are totally empty in 2032, it'll still have ongoing tax revenue coming in, but it'll only be enough to cover roughly 75 to 78% of earned benefits. That remaining slice, that is the funding shortfall. It is quite literally a cliff, and it's arriving several months earlier than experts were projecting just a year ago. Moving on to Section 2, causes of the shortfall. Why is the gap widening? At its core, this really just comes down to a fundamental math problem. And we can see this super clearly if we look at the numbers projected for 2025. In 2025, Social Security's retirement fund brings in about $1.2 trillion, mainly from 185 million workers paying payroll taxes. But the program costs $1.4 trillion to pay out benefits to its 56 million beneficiaries. They're simply paying out more money than they take in. For a while now, the program has relied on its trust fund reserves to bridge that gap, but, well, those reserves are exactly what's running out. So why is this gap widening so incredibly fast? Well, it's a mix of demographics and policy decisions. First up, an aging population combined with lower fertility rates. People are having fewer kids, which means fewer younger workers are entering the workforce to pay the taxes that support a growing aging population. Second, restrictive immigration policies have actually led to fewer immigrants contributing to that tax base. And third, recent tax policies, specifically the One Big Beautiful Bill tax cuts passed under the Trump administration, well, they reduced the taxes collected on a large group of beneficiaries that effectively choked off billions in revenue that would have otherwise gone straight into the trust fund. So the crucial point here is captured perfectly in this quote from Shai Akabas over at the Bipartisan Policy Center. The structural imbalance is just mathematically unsustainable. It literally cannot go on forever without intervention. The reserves will hit zero, and the system will forcefully correct itself via those massive 22 to 25% cuts, unless Washington actually steps up and does something. Section 3, Republican plan, focus on reducing outflows. The conservative strategy, which has been outlined in budgets from groups like the Republican Study Committee, focuses really heavily on the outflow side of the equation. Their argument is pretty straightforward. To save the system, we need to bring costs down so they match the revenue we already have. The crux of this plan involves raising the national retirement age. That means younger workers would have to wait longer before they could claim their full benefits. And a key tenet of this approach is entirely avoiding any new tax burdens on wealth or high-income earners to make up the difference. Let's look at how this builds on historical precedent, because adjusting the parameters of the program isn't exactly a new idea. Social Security was signed into law by FDR way back in 1935, but during a previous solvency crisis in 1983, Congress actually passed bipartisan amendments that gradually raised the retirement age from 65 up to 67 for people born in 1960 and later. Proponents of the current Republican plan argue that, hey, life expectancies are changing, so modernizing the system again through structural adjustments is just the most fiscally responsible path forward. And the rhetoric around all this, it is incredibly sharp. You have conservative voices and prominent figures openly questioning the very structure of the program itself. Senator Ron Johnson has referred to it as a legal Ponzi scheme, which is a sentiment echoed by Elon Musk, who literally called it the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Some officials have even floated the idea of fully privatizing the system. So this really frames a massive philosophical divide, viewing the system as an outdated entitlement that needs deep structural reduction versus viewing it as an earned guarantee that has to be protected at absolutely all costs. Section 4, Democratic Plan. Scrap the cap. Focus on increasing inflows. Now, what's really fascinating about this side of the debate is understanding how Social Security taxes actually work right now in the real world. There's this thing called the income cap, and currently it sits right around $185,000. What this means is that any wages you earn up to $185,000 are subject to the Social Security payroll tax. But the moment you earn your $185,000 and first dollar, you do not pay a single penny more into Social Security for the rest of the year. Because of this cap, we end up with this remarkable mathematical reality. Look at this. A waitress making $40,000 a year effectively pays a 12.4% Social Security tax rate. A dentist making exactly $185,000, they also pay 12.4%. But a hedge fund manager making, say, $1 million a year, because their income far exceeds the cap, their effective rate drops to just 2.2%. And for billionaires, it drops to a tiny, almost invisible fraction of a percent. The wealthiest earners actually finish paying their Social Security taxes in the first few days or weeks of the year, while average workers are paying it out of every single paycheck year-round. This dynamic right here is exactly what the Democratic strategy targets. Their solution is to keep current and future benefits exactly as promised, without touching the retirement age. Instead, they want to address the inflow side of the equation. By simply scrapping the cap entirely, top earners and billionaires would be required to pay that same 12.4% effective rate on all of their income, exactly like the average worker does. Proponents of this plan argue this single, pretty simple fix would inject enough revenue to save Social Security for decades to come. This brilliantly illustrates the absolute core of the debate. It's two entirely opposite philosophies trying to defuse the exact same bomb. On one hand, you reduce outflows by raising the retirement age and cutting overall benefits without raising taxes. On the other hand, you increase inflows by taxing all wealth equally to maintain current benefit promises. Section 5, the ticking clock. What happens next? From a purely economic standpoint, the policy fixes are actually quite straightforward. You either pull the lever on taxes, or you pull the lever on benefits, or maybe a mix of both. But as this quote highlights, the politics? Incredibly difficult. We have hit a point of such severe gridlock in Washington, it is almost politically infeasible for the two sides to come together and compromise. Any solution requires bipartisan buy-in to get past the filibuster in the Senate, but right now, neither side wants to yield even an inch of ground on their core economic philosophies. And listen, this isn't some distant problem for the next generation to figure out. 2032 is just 6 years away. That is exactly why experts and politicians are starting to call the upcoming midterms the Social Security election. Because of 6-year Senate terms, the lawmakers that citizens elect to the Senate this November will physically be the ones sitting at the negotiating table when that trust fund runs dry. The people put into office right now are the ones who will ultimately decide which of these two paths the country takes. So, I'll leave you with this to think about. The math is totally undeniable, and the deadline is firmly set. Will lawmakers find a way to compromise and defuse the bomb, or will gridlock win out, letting the clock strike midnight on American seniors and forcing a catastrophic 22 to 25% cut? The future of retirement in America is quite literally on the ballot. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.